my brothers and sisters, fellow faculty members, and fellow students, I'm sure I enjoy the sympathy of most of you in this assignment. This is a frightening place to be, and yet an inspiring place to be. And I shall do my best to try and share with you this morning some thoughts on the subject which has been assigned to me. Before doing that, however, I might share with you an announcement which was given to me by one of my students yesterday. It's from the music department. And I thought perhaps it was of sufficient importance to be of general interest. It says, due to the shortage of trained trumpeters, the end of the world will be postponed 3 months. At least that gives us a little more time. But it isn't customary for the music department to let us down like that. Those of you who saw your newspaper, Deseret News, last Saturday night may have noticed a whole page devoted to a series of graphs and diagrams depicting the rise of crime in the central population area of Utah during the last 10 years. And if you observed closely, you would notice that in most of the categories there was a very definite dip in the year 1959. It took us about 2.5 years to build the crime-fighting machine that made that dip possible. And it took the cooperation of the city fathers and the community as a whole to bring it about. One of the things that we stressed more than almost any other one thing to try and bring about that control of crime was the control of drugs. It so happens that in a community that is striving to provide its young people with a wholesome place in which to grow up, trying to make it safe for people to walk on the streets, to run a business, to go to school, many aspects of criminal activity are directly related to the problem of drugs. Many people don't realize that a person on heroin, not able to hold down a regular job frequently, will burglarize anywhere from 15 to 25 establishments in a single week, trying to get the necessary money to get a fix which often costs him anywhere from $35 to $75 per day to maintain. And so if you're going to control crime, you must control drugs, because prostitution, burglary, strong-armed robbery, and many of the things that destroy our community life are directly related to this problem. A year after this particular dip in crime, many facets of our crime-fighting machine were dismantled. And so the statistics very shortly began rising again, and have been rising rather astronomically ever since. Until today, we are confronted by a problem in illicit drugs that has truly become alarming. Actually, the problem is somewhat different than many people suspect. Drug addiction is not like the opium dream basement affair or attic affair that it used to be years ago. Drug addiction has become a very sophisticated pattern of life for many people whom you would never suspect are drug-oriented. And this is what I have been asked to say something about today. I am not one who believes in the panic approach to drug control, but neither am I one of those who believes that we can minimize the dangers of the so-called minor drugs There's a tendency at the present time, for example, to minimize the danger of marijuana. And yet you could go to any major police department on the coast and find hundreds of reports of accidents and crimes where the participants admitted that their accident or crime occurred while they were under the influence of a marijuana binge. I am not in favor of overemphasizing the danger of these drugs, but neither should we mitigate them. It's interesting that the presidential reports that have been coming through on the drug problem, particularly those coming from Stanford University by Dr. Richard H. Bloom, stress something that should be very familiar to the people that are listening to me today. Richard H. Bloom said that if you want to really know how the whole American culture became drug-oriented, which he says it is, the culprits actually turn out to be the more or less innocent-looking cup of coffee, the cigarette, a glass of tea, or a bottle of alcohol. People have become accustomed, he says, to looking for a boost in a cup of coffee, or getting a tranquilizer effect, as they assume, from a few drafts on a cigarette. And when they can't get the boost that they need from the coffee, and if they can't get the tranquilizing effect from the alcohol or something else they've been depending upon, then they go for the synthetics. And it's a very, sometimes gradual, but nevertheless real escalation from the so-called minor drugs up to something that's much more serious. Way back in February 27th, 1833, in the little frontier community of Kirtland, God launched his program designed to provide freedom from drug addiction. And as Dr. Bloom says, drug orientation, or an obsession, a dependency upon something to boost or something to tranquilize, something to lift or something to put us to sleep, begins with these things specifically identified by God in 1833 as being the open gate to drug dependency: tobacco, alcohol, and the hot drinks of tea and coffee, now followed by the synthetics. Now, these drug crutches have moved primarily from the innocent stage or the innocent arena of coffee, tobacco, alcohol, tea, etc., into an area where people have now made it as part of their lives to deal with the pressures of our time, where they will depend on a pill, a capsule, a drug of some kind to change the normal facet of life and achieve something that they hope will make their life more compatible under the circumstances. These drug crutches have now become so severe and so widespread that just a few months ago in Salt Lake City, it was necessary to set up a crisis center where young people, especially from junior high school and college age levels, could come when they reached the personality panic breakdown. Someplace where they could run when they were frightened, not to be arrested, but just someplace where they could go and have somebody, a medical officer or some volunteer, put their arm around them and just hold them so they didn't hurt themselves or somebody else, till they could somehow get out of the freak out or whatever else had happened to them under these drugs. This crisis center in Salt Lake has revealed something to us about our drug problem, much more surprising than one might have expected. Because most of those who came were not on LSD, and they were not on heroin, they were not on the heavies at all. They were on amphetamines. They were on speed. They were on the drugs that almost anybody can get, that they had used to abuse themselves to the point where they had developed panic personalities and had exploded out of control. 80%, up to 80% of the hundreds of young people pouring through the crisis center in Salt Lake City are addicts of speed, pep pills. Now, the vast majority of those who are listening to me this morning, either on television or in this audience, have experimented with this drug. And it should be understood, since it has become the cultural plague of the moment, better than it has been understood. And so I want to start there. And I would like to quote very briefly from a bulletin that was issued to all educational administrators just about a year ago, so that these people, many of them who had never had drug problems before, would have a little better understanding of the problem. And may I refer to this very briefly, first as to amphetamines. Now you know these things by speed: pep pills, Dexies, bennies, drivers, crossroads, footballs, co-pilots. These are some of the terms that are used. The amphetamine is a stimulant prescribed by physicians chiefly to reduce appetite if you're overweight and relieve minor cases of mental depression. And who doesn't have it occasionally? Both of them, as a matter of fact. Just to indicate to you how easy it is to get involved in this type of drug orientation, let me bear a personal testimony. A number of years ago, doing a lot of desk work and feeling that I should lose a little weight, I asked my doctor for advice, and he said, "There's something I can give you that is not habit-forming." Those are magic words, not habit-forming. And he said it will curb your appetite, give you a lot of extra energy, and you'll be able to reduce intake and therefore lose some of these excess pounds. Great. So I began this program, had no idea really what I was getting, but I noticed that it not only did what the doctor said, it did something else. After about 2 weeks, it was difficult to sleep at night. Then you go to the doctor and say, sleep is difficult. Do we have something to sort of slow things down at the end of the day? I noticed a certain amount of restlessness. I noticed that if this particular little compound was not taken as indicated by the physician, there was a very deep depression and an obsession for sleep, almost as though one were drugged. Finally, I went back to the doctor and I said, "This worries me. What is this anyway?" It was an amphetamine. And so I stopped it. Do you know that it took me 3 weeks to return to an ordinary, wholesome balance of metabolical processes after that experience? Now notice the cycle here that one goes through. First we're told it's not habit-forming. It was habit-forming. Not physiologically, but psychologically. And as soon as it is worn off, there was an anxiety to return, to get more of it so that one could feel the wonderful sense of confidence and energy and dynamics that went along with it. It was psychologically addicting. These are the amphetamines. Now if they start making you feel good and you begin depending upon them, look what happens. Habitual users often make amphetamines, take amphetamines and continuously for 3 or 4 days, eating nothing, on the go constantly until they black out from exhaustion. How is it spotted? This bulletin says heavy users may exhibit extreme restlessness and nervousness with tremor of hands, dilated pupils, dryness of mouth, excessive perspiration. They become excessively talkative and suffer sometimes delusions and hallucinations. If usage is heavy and prolonged, the user may exhibit symptoms that closely resemble paranoid schizophrenia. Dangers. The bulletin says, while these drugs are not physically addictive, users can be hooked emotionally and psychologically. Since the body builds up a tolerance to amphetamines, usage is often toward heavier and more frequent doses. The dangers are threefold. Now, I'm talking about the pep pills. Heavy users are inclined to be violent, particularly if and when they enter the paranoid stage. Users are highly susceptible to such ailments as pneumonia, malnutrition, and exhaustion as a result of going without food and sleep for prolonged periods of time. Users can develop high blood pressure, abnormal heart rhythms, heart attacks, and permanent brain damage. Pep pills, and more than half of our nation is taking them, they say. More of these are being taken than aspirins at the moment. Now, if you get all pepped up, what do you do when it's time to go to sleep? You can't do it. So the next thing to get is a tranquilizer. And next we come to barbiturates. Now, barbiturates or sleeping pills, tranquilizers, are highly addictive. This is an addictive drug. Barbiturates are sedatives prescribed in small doses to induce sleep or relieve tension. There are 1,500 different types. All are legally restricted to prescription use only. Primary effect of a heavy dose is sluggishness and depression. The user may slump into a deep sleep or coma, depending on how much of the drug he has taken. How spotted? Look for the barbiturate addict to exhibit the common symptoms of drunkenness. Speech becomes slurred and indistinct. There is a loss of physical coordination, which may be accompanied by mental and emotional instability. Many barbiturate addicts display a quarrelsome disposition and a hair-trigger temper. Many also carry telltale burns on their fingers caused by cigarettes that have burned down unnoticed because the pain is blocked out. Danger. The abuse of barbiturates carries with it numerous risks. First, barbiturates are physically addictive, and withdrawal is both painful and dangerous, more so than withdrawal from heroin. I have never had occasion to watch a barbiturate withdrawal, but I have seen the heroin withdrawals, and if this is worse, there isn't much that frightens an addict more than heroin withdrawal. Barbiturate withdrawal, it says here, is worse than heroin. Serious accidents can occur since the warning signals of pain are effectively dulled. Overdosage is common because the user cannot remember how many barbiturates he has already taken, and more people die from barbiturate poisoning every year than from any other poison. Often it is called suicide when it was not suicide at all. The person just becomes so dazed and dull, he could not remember what he had already taken and therefore took an overdose in his more or less dazed condition. Finally, barbiturates, when taken with alcohol, can lead directly to coma and death. People who start depending upon the amphetamines for the lift, and maybe a whole lot of them for the thrill, and then the barbiturates to slow them down, get on a cycle of drug dependency, which may very well take them to the point where the thrill of life is gone, where now they are in sort of a cycle that they cannot escape from. And it's very easy now to move up from this to something that's a little different. And very often marijuana fits in here. And then the LSD, which is incipient insanity, self-induced. Here's what the bulletin had to say about LSD, and I'm briefing it because of the problem of time. LSD derives its name from the colorless, odorless substance of which it is made, lysergic acid, formula 25. It comes from the semi-synthetic derivative of the ergot fungus of rye, a black substance that grows on the grain. and it's possible to manufacture synthetically. Primary effect: the user experiences distortion and intensification of sensory perception, along with lessened ability to discriminate between fact and fantasy. The mental effects are quite unpredictable, but may include illusions, panic, psychotic or antisocial behavior, and sometimes impulses toward violence and self-destruction. Persons on LSD trips often speak of seeing sounds, tasting colors, smelling noises, and so on. Actually, what we get is a complete breakdown in the brain of the interpretive capacity to handle the senses as they come in. And this is why we get signals going into the switchboard and a complete distorted reaction in the brain of what actually is being seen or felt. As a result, we have individuals like Tommy Forrester. Tommy Forrester was an engineer major, college student. He went to a party where they told him that a mind-expanding drug called LSD would give him wonderful creative experiences, and that he would have capacities that ordinarily are not available to human beings. He took the LSD drug, and it did just what they said it would do. He saw multicolored particles of material floating all around him. He looked at the walls, and they were melting like rainbows. He looked at pictures. The colors would flow out of the pictures onto the floor. And then he looked into a mirror, and something horrible happened. Part of his face was rotting away, and the other side of his face began to look like a monster. And then he began to look at the people, and they were turning into monsters. And it frightened him. He began to scream. He began to shout what he was seeing. Everybody knew what was happening. To clear his head, he ran over to a wall and beat his head against the doorpost. Blood spurted from his forehead and his nose. Somebody tried to stop him. He broke himself away and rushed into the next room, thinking he could escape. There was an open window. He was 18 floors from the street below. Across were the roofs of buildings across the street. In his LSD mind, they were only a few inches away. He could step across and escape from these people that were trying to grab him. And so he tried. And when they picked him up on the street below, of course, he was dead. Tommy Forrester. LSD. It's happening all around us. The worst part about LSD, you don't know what it's doing to you. Some people can say, I'm an acid head. I can take this stuff. It doesn't bother me. And then all of a sudden, like one woman down in Los Angeles, proud of her ability to take LSD, in one of these panic seizures, cut out the eyes of a child, of a baby. We have some amazing things coming in on the record. We have people who stop LSD, and 2 years later it starts getting hold of them, and they have all of the trauma that they were so proud of the fact that they missed earlier. Usually the freak-out trips average about 1 out of 20 if they can estimate them properly. But now we know that what it does is to break down the chromosomes of the cells as well, so that as this woman recently in Los Angeles gave birth to a badly deformed baby traceable directly to LSD. And so we're getting a little better acquainted with it, and the popularity of it is rapidly decreasing. As the Crisis Center in Salt Lake City found, the major problem was with the person on PEP pills who was relying and depending upon them for just daily living, and their personalities went into panic because the body cannot handle them. Finally, we get those people who go from the hallucination arena over into the area of the heavy opiates. Now, the heavy opiates are usually induced by a friend rather than a pusher in the beginning. The opiates that are the most popular at the moment, in fact, the opiate that is the most popular and the one that we find among students across the nation and young people generally, is this one of heroin. 90% of heroin users grew out of marijuana smokers. This is why Dr. Bloom says we start with the cigarette and then the marijuana form of smoking, because if we can stop that, there probably would be very, very little opiate or heroin addiction. This is the way the thing escalates. And so it demonstrates that the Lord was right in the beginning when he launched his freedom from drug addiction approach. He started with what was ordinarily considered the minor addictive drugs. Now, heroin, being a derivative of the opiates, is so strong that it is completely outlawed even for doctors. It is so addictive, it is outlawed even for doctors. It is tremendously expensive to get hold of, and once it gets a grip on a person, I have heard experts in the field say no one is ever cured. Now, there are those that deny this because they'll be off of it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. At Lexington, they tell me that they have been off for as long as 5, but they come back. I have had officers, experts in the field say that they have never seen a person completely cured of heroin. These are the mainliners. These are the ones that shoot it in. And once it gets hold of you, all of your life stops. Heroin becomes your whole obsession. To get the fix for today, you have to have one tonight. When you wake up in the morning, there has to be one right there by your bed. This is what it does to you. And it gets stronger and stronger and usually ends in the destruction of the individual. You don't want to be an engineer anymore or a great musician. You don't want to be a good father, neighbor, or parent. Just get heroin, that's all. A good friend of mine at the Long Beach Police Department, working with some young people in that city, found a very brilliant young girl that he and the policewomen of the department had worked over a period of several months to try and see if they couldn't break her loose. And finally one day he found her with her head in her hands in a stupor. She had a note beside her. This is a brilliant girl with a wonderful brain, and she'd written a psalm. And I got a copy of it from Bill Helper, Officer Bill Helper, and I want to share it with you. Here's what this girl wrote. She said, "King Heroin is my shepherd. I shall always want. He maketh me to lie down in the gutters. He leadeth me beside troubled waters. He destroyeth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of wickedness for the effort's sake. Yea, I shall walk through the valley of poverty and will fear all evil. For thou, heroin, art with me. Thy needle and capsule try to comfort me, but thou strippest the table of groceries in the presence of my family. Thou robbest my head of reason. My cup of sorrow runneth over. Surely heroin addiction shall stalk me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the damned forever." On the other side of this little sheet of paper, this girl had written, "Truly this is my psalm. I am 20 years old, but for the past year and a half I've been wandering down the nightmare alley of the junkies. I want to quit taking dope, and I try, but I can't. Jail didn't cure me, nor did hospitalization help me for long. The doctors told my family it would have been better and indeed kinder if the person who first got me hooked on dope had taken a gun and blown my brains out. I wish to God she had." She was introduced to heroin by a close friend, telling her she was missing something. Now, our main problem with drugs is attitude toward life, and I want to close by reminding you what happened on this campus earlier this month when we held a symposium here on this problem. Dr. Eugene Fox, Chief of Children's Services, Division of Mental Health for the state of Utah, spoke on a number of topics, but concerning drugs, we were told the drug crisis is beyond anything ever imagined years ago. And then we had a group of panelists who were from our state hospital, all on drug cure. And the fantastic thing about it was their declaration, one after the other, that they didn't intend to stop. Now that's what drugs does to one's pattern of life. It destroys one's entire value system. These young people said, the panelists claimed, they enjoyed their reactions to drugs and would probably continue using them despite being at the state mental hospital for cure. A 17-year-old girl on the panel said her husband had used marijuana to turn on their little daughter. One's whole value system disappears. And so, may I close with this thought. In this audience today, and those who may be listening on television, we are divided into two groups. Some of you have never fooled with drugs outside of a prescription under the direction of your doctor, and you're a success. And I hope you'll commit yourselves this day to always remain above drug obsession and addiction. And now may I say just a word to the other group. These are they that have fooled around with drugs and even now depend upon it for the lift and for the tranquilizer and for the endurance, the removal of tension, for a little courage to face a crisis, like giving a speech. There are all kinds of crises. Let me say to those, will you commit yourselves this day to kick the habit, whether it is the basics of the cigarette, coffee, tea, alcohol, marijuana, or going on up into the opiates? Will you resolve to do it? Will you join in the campaign launched in 1833, which was designed for the whole world? God's campaign for freedom from drug addiction. That's what this is all about. To make better people, happier people, more successful people, better mothers and fathers, better neighbors, better scientists, better musicians. You do it free of drug addiction. For those who will, there's a great blessing. And it comes from God himself, our Father, who said that all who will do these things will receive health, shall find wisdom, great treasures of knowledge, shall run and not be weary, shall walk and not faint, and the destroying angel shall pass by them. I could wish no greater blessing for you nor me than this, which comes as a direct promise to those who will avoid that which destroys and adhere to that which builds, nourishing food, exercise, righteous living, activity that is wholesome and that involves us in the things that make people happy and that provides an opportunity for service both to self, to family, to community, to nation, and to God. And my prayer is that we can reap this blessing and that those who have not dabbled with these obsessions will leave them alone, and that those who have fooled with them will abandon them, that they may have this blessing from God. I pray through Jesus Christ. Amen.